2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Don't Do That, the podcast where we talk about what not to do at work and beyond.
As equity practitioners, we found ourselves often thinking that folks should stop doing things before they start doing things. Hence the title of our podcast, Don't Do That. I'm Ani. I'm an equity coach, organizational equity strategist, and educator with a deep curiosity for how to improve systems and a commitment to lift others as I continue to learn and grow.
I'm Karen, and I've worked in social justice for over a decade. I'm a consultant, coach, and thought partner. My purpose is to make community matter. I do that by helping leaders create better work environments. Adi and I met as consultants and quickly became friends. Collectively, we have over 25 years of experience navigating equity, inclusion, and justice in the workplace. Don't Do That is a platform to tell stories about making mistakes at work and how to fix them. The views on this podcast are our own. We do not speak on behalf of our organizations or the communities we mention. All right, welcome listeners. Today on Don't Do That, we are discussing identity and workplace trauma. Now, many of us have overcome experiences at work that left us feeling invisible, unheard, and small. Today, we are joined by Melissa Goldner, founder and CEO of Malu Journey, a woman-owned transformation company redefining wellness at home and in the workplace. Now, a little disclaimer before we jump into things. Today's topic may be sensitive for some of you, and so we ask that you use your own discretion when listening. So let's jump into it. Melissa, we're so excited to have you join Ani and I on Don't Do That for this episode.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, so you and I actually got connected through a former boss. And I have to say, the minute that you and I had our first conversation, I felt like we just clicked instantly. And it's like rare that you have those kinds of connections with people. And we've stayed in touch ever since.
I absolutely love that. I actually just texted him, Karen, right before this, and I said, fun fact, I'm about to record a podcast with Karen. And I said, amazing how our connections not just became a one-off call, but a partnership. Kudos to you for having a good eye.
I know. I'm so glad that he connected us. And I'm so glad that we are now peers and colleagues in this work. So thank you for joining us. But we'd love for you to maybe officially introduce yourself to our listeners and share a little bit about your background and any fun fact that you want folks to know.
All right. Well, Melissa Goldner. I'm a recovering management consultant. I was most recently a partner at a management consulting company focused on org and culture. What I did love about that was that oftentimes in that type of work, we get access to a lot of broken systems. And any of my team members or former team members would tell you that Melissa's way of working is a little bit different than a typical partner. If I got access to a broken system, I would try to inject fairness and equity, or identifying people that might not be your loudest voice in the room to be part of the succession plan, things like that. And that is what I loved about that type of job. What you might not know that's not on my resume is that for most of my life, I believe that working hard, you would earn visibility, you would earn belonging, maybe even love. I'm a daughter of two Chinese immigrants.
Okay.
And when they moved to the United States and gave me the opportunity to thrive, I was actually given three options of what to be when I grew up. One was a partner of a management consulting company like my father, one was a lawyer, and one was a doctor. So I became a partner at a management consulting company, and it wasn't until I had my second baby, I was experiencing postpartum depression, all the roles, and then I was laid off, this big fancy job. All the roles that I played, like leader, partner, high performer, just fell away. And what was left was just me. Finally, I think in over 40 years of my life, I finally got the chance to ask myself, who am I without the doing? And that unraveling was my kind of impetus of my birth to Malu.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
And relatable.
Absolutely. I know that I have for a long time, especially in my younger years, kind of measured myself by my level of productivity
Yes.
and by achievements. And I think that we're so used to doing that and being humans doing instead of humans just being. So,
That just, I'm sorry, I couldn't help gasp. That's a natural gasp. When I first sought therapy when I had postpartum, and I'm Chinese American, and so for those that might not know who are listening, in Chinese culture, therapy is really stigmatized, and it took a lot for me to, feel confident enough that I needed this for myself. And the first time, you know how you date your therapist, not really, but
yeah.
you meet a bunch and they're not the right match or they don't understand your lived experiences. Megan, amazing. She's a life changer. My therapist currently said, "Do you have a voice in your mind that says, I find worth in doing, not being?" And I started crying and I said, "You get me. You get me."
Mm.
And ever since then, so the fact, Karen, you spoke those words out loud, I just have the chills.
Oh
Oh
my
my God.
goodness, the connection.
Yeah.
Listen, clicking on all cylinders, Melissa, we are.
And the immigrant story, I don't know that I've shared on this podcast or with you, Melissa. I'm the daughter of two Ethiopian immigrants, and the first gen American story is similar to like what you shared of like the pressure to be the sacrifices your parents have made to sort of like come here, the opportunities lost in home country, and like whether it's self-imposed or imposed by your parents, like the idea of like I have to be successful. I have to do like, how can I be idle? How can I not sort of, be maximizing every second, every opportunity because, people have sacrificed so much for me to be here and have this opportunity. It's like, I don't have the privilege of rest. So,
Mm.
I I used to think that I went to London one time for a client project, and we had to walk from one site to another site, and we had walked through a park. And at that time, I was like, what is up with all these weirdos sitting in the park doing work? I was like,
wasting
I do
time.
not
Yeah.
understand. I was like, wasting time. Do you understand how much you could be getting done right now? I had no idea because rest wasn't part of how we were wired, especially, Ani, as you said, being raised with immigrant parents. So that really resonates with. I will tell you now that I can sit in a park, but it still takes a little bit of time. I still have to work on it.
Yes. All very relatable.
For sure.
Progress, not perfection, right?
Exactly. Exactly. We are ever evolving. And I think that this topic is really important because it's something that I think we don't spend enough time vocalizing, but I would imagine it is and assume is more common than we think. And when we think about even like the landscape around workplace trauma and then layering identity onto it, which is a large part of your work, Melissa, in doing my research, I was like, how much time do we spend at work over the course of our lifetime? And doing a quick Google search, I learned that we spend 90,000 hours at work in our lifetime. And I know that that means that a lot of us will have to navigate positive and negative experiences more than a few times at work. And I think when you layer identity, and especially like a marginalized identity, it just comes with a whole lot more nuance that can make us feel, small, and it can make us feel like we're excluded, especially given the way that work cultures conform to dominant culture. And so I would love to share a little bit about like the belonging piece of this too with both of you. So, in doing more research, I came across Beth Kaplan, who's the author of Braving the Workplace, Belonging at the Breaking Point. And she talks about this idea that belonging is actually something that is innate for all of us as human beings. And it must be something that is felt, experienced, and owned internally. So it's not something that can be bestowed upon you. Like, and I thought that that was really interesting that our sense of belonging has to come from us,
Mhm.
and only we can decide if we belong in a certain workplace. And she goes on further to talk about this idea of belonging uncertainty and how that belonging uncertainty is that nagging voice in your head that makes you question your worth. And I think a lot of what we talked about in the beginning is a piece of that, and that belonging uncertainty is actually a form of workplace trauma, and that has both the emotional impacts and physical impacts. And I feel like am more used to hearing about the emotional impacts in terms of like anxiety and depression and burnout, but also thinking about like the physical impacts that has on our actual bodies and how our bodies keep score of these things, and whether that be like increased cortisol levels, which is, cortisol is a stress hormone, increased heart rate, or our nervous system being in a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze. And I know that I've had, some workplace experiences that I felt I've experienced all of these things, even if I didn't have the language to describe it in this way.
Mm.
Um, so I know, Melissa, your work, again, it dives a little bit deeper into exploring the intersection of trauma and burnout for women. And you shared some really great insights with us from the research that you've done. And would love for you to add a little bit of color to some of the key insights that you mentioned. First, we can talk about this idea of internalized invisibility, which specifically happens for women after a major life change or life experience. So, we'd love for you to share a little bit more about what that looks like, or what your research has shown.
So there were a lot of insights that came from the recent research. So I recently self-funded some research with these Stanford professors that I previously worked with um, on actually the topic, and we called it the impact of the fear of irrelevance. And
Mhm.
what we realized that the impact of the fear of irrelevance was different when you were looking at external circumstances. So when you think about externally, think of like your LinkedIn profile, your pedigree, like that public facing,
Mhm.
maybe your CV. And when you think about internal, that's really like self-worth. That's really being founded. And for me, after a life change, for me particularly was a layoff. I realized that I had provided too much power to an organization of my worth itself. And so from that, I started a lot of internal work to develop my own personal scorecard. And I will say, ever since then, I've been grounded in that no matter what job or whatever project that I'm in, I am grounded in who I am. And ironically, I'm so grateful that this happened because Malu would never have been started without that. So that's some background with that point.
Mm. Oh, wow. That resonates a lot with me. Because I think for me, as I've matured in my career, I have accepted that like one title or one role is not the same as like what I feel like my purpose and calling is in life, and that I
Mhm.
can do that in a bunch of different spaces. Um, but it took years to to get there, and I'm sure that there's more insight that will come as I continue to grow. But that resonates a lot with me.
Yeah, I think it's so connected to Karen, the conversation you and I had around like Black excellence and like the idea of, what it means to be excellent or successful, and how we can sort of change the narrative around that. So it's not so connected to like pedigree or, the job
Yeah,
that you have.
or
Right.
that question around productivity. I want to get to some of the other insights that you shared with us. The second one being that the burnout of being everything to everybody. And when I read that, I was like, "Child, that is every every Black woman's story has been being everything to everybody." Okay, so that one hit home for sure. Your third insight was around healing requires both reflection and action.
Mhm.
And then the fourth one being that trauma informed workplaces must include trained managers and structures of support, and not just the wine nights and yoga retreats, which I thought was really funny as they say
I
sometimes.
couldn't help but inject a little bit of my personality with that insight. I have to say, just a little
Yes.
bit of creative power there. So for the burnout of being everything to everybody, there were a lot of different. We did qualitative and quantitative interviews in a large study, but I'll speak to my own personal experiences because I think, without asking the permission of others at the moment, I think I feel more comfortable speaking my own. The
Yeah.
burnout of being everything to everybody, that really for me was what you were saying before about the intersectionality of like multiple types of layers of experiences that a lot of organizations haven't quite gotten right yet. So, for instance, my mother was one of 10 children. My grandpa, her father, when he was in Taiwan, had the chance to become an engineer. And during that time, there were very few people that didn't go into trade and got into these types of programs, or you could potentially make a successful career. However, his soul was converted to God, and he decided to pursue being a pastor. 10 children, and I remember my mother always told me, they didn't actually have enough food for the 10 children. Oftentimes they were really hungry, but they had an open door policy for whoever came into the house. They would give their food to them, even though they didn't have enough to
Wow.
be, full or satiated. What that told me when I was a young kid growing up is that it's good equals like giving yourself,
Yeah.
to the point of starvation, right? And so although I never starved in terms of like from a physical food perspective, I starved my energy by always giving to people. And I thought that in my culture was what was right, which was honoring my family, honoring that culture. And it's only been, fairly recently where I'm trying to challenge those limited beliefs and realize that those aren't necessarily truths.
Yeah, man,
That's
that
incredible.
I know we need a pause for the word that you just dropped here, Melissa, because it's so true. And I know that even in like the course of my career, that even the overworking, right? This in the vein of being everything to everybody. And one of the distinctions that I've made is understanding that like stress that doesn't always have to be negative, especially if you're in a role or career that you enjoy what you do, you can still overwork in that career.
Mhm.
And I know that for me, I didn't recognize it as overworking and as stress. And like it got to a point where my body started to tell me and like give me signals like you're doing too much. Like I started grinding my teeth. I had to like go to the dentist, and the dentist was like, "Are you stressed?" And I'm like, "Who isn't stressed?" And he's like, "You're grinding your teeth." And then I got shingles like shortly after
What?
that.
Mm.
And I only knew shingles as like something that people over the age of like 60 get. And I was in my like late 20s, early 30s. So I was like really confused as to how this happened to me. But it was all a trigger from a stress response.
Wow.
And I had to
Girl,
learn.
the teeth grinding is real. I went from like a T-Rex in terms of my teeth, and now I'm like a plant eater, brontosaurus, because they're all flat from all the grinding that's occurred.
It is. And I think we have to start to pay attention to these signals that like our body gives us, that these are things that are telling us that like, you're doing too much in one way or another. Um, but Anya, I would love to hear from you. Any experiences that you have in relation to like burnout or doing too much or feeling like you're everything to
I
everybody?
mean, yes. Plus, I mean, as you both were talking, the thing that I was thinking about was not only like the cultural thing of just like the idea of, it's community and family first over self always, but also like
Right.
how we sort of acculturate people to motherhood as well. It's like, it's of course you have to put your kids first. So as you both were talking, I was thinking like I'm totally in the space of giving a lot to other spaces, and like how do I get out of that and still feel okay was sort of like where I'm at, because I still exist in cultures that sort of prioritize those things, right? Like all the mom groups are still saying like this is how you show up for your kids. Like I'm still in relation with my family and even my husband's family, and like everyone is still sort of saying those things currently. So it feels a little risky to sort of be the one person who's saying like, no, actually I'm gonna be by myself for Mother's Day. I'm not going to participate in the like group activity. I'm not going to be with my kids actually on Mother's Day, all those things. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get that. I don't think that it's a like a hard stop sign. I
yeah.
think it turns into like a yield and a
I mean,
merge.
like the thing that
But
came up was like, I mean, that sounds great. Like, dot dot dot,
Mhm.
and like I need the map. Like, what does that look like getting there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that Melissa, you talked about your experience around being laid off and how that was a moment for you to pause and just kind of reassess and reflect on who you are.
Yes,
Um, would love to know how, like, are there other markers that folks should be paying attention to that give them that moment of pause? I think a layoff at work could be one marker. Um, are there other things, like for me, I think I'm thinking about my own career journey. Leadership transitions have been a marker for me to pause and think about, like, how do I still fit in this place? Do I still fit in this place? Are there other things that you can think of that help people to,
absolutely.
reflect?
So I think I would bucket it into two different um, things. One is forced pause. So for me, that layoff was a forced pause where I was finally given the opportunity to create space. And I'll be honest with you, my first innate kind of behavior was, okay, who do I need to set time with on the phone and blah 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 blah. I was uncomfortable with having from blocked calendar to no calendar, and so I had
Mm.
to trick my brain to like create calendar invites for joy or like reflection to trick my brain,
Oh.
and give myself a little bit of grace. There are also some forced pauses like losing somebody in your life. So, I remember I was in the churn, and once you're in that kind of wheel, you're always running and you forget, and it becomes like your world, like the toxicity of the executive leadership or something like that. And it really can take a physical impact on you. Like for me, it was showing up as like a heavy chest, shortness, tightness of breath. My anxiety was showcasing, like I felt like I was on a verge of a panic attack for 3 months in a
Mm.
row. And I knew that that wasn't right. But in my mind, I thought resilience was survival. Like the definition that I had about resilience, success wasn't optional, it was a duty, to honor my family. And so
Mm.
postpartum depression, in addition to the layoff, I think forced me to confront a truth that I had been avoiding. I wasn't thriving. I was surviving in a system that was never built for me. Therapy
Mm.
gave me the courage to redefine resilience. So now it's not about the enduring the impossible, it's actually having the strength to stop, heal, and rewrite the narrative of what resilience means in the first place.
Oh my.
Oh, that was a good line. Surviving in a system that wasn't built for me.
Built for me.
Mm,
It took me a while to realize that because I always would take blame in my culture. It's like if you got feedback, you're like, oh my gosh, okay, sorry. I will honor thy elders, honor hierarchy, right? And until I was like being like, nah,
yeah,
you don't. It's the system wasn't built. We're not all starting from the same place in the race.
yeah,
Not at all.
yeah.
Yeah, not at all. Absolutely. This is hitting me. It's like I'm trying to think, like, which gem do I want to grab first. Um, but I think that you also hit on a really important point of the forced pause and how that can be a moment that helps you to own your own, like, healing journey. And I think we all have to decide, like, when we own our healing journey, and knowing that, I know that for me, I was in the course of my career and thinking about one particular instance, it was really hard for me to accept that I was in a system that I wasn't thriving in, and in a workplace that I wasn't thriving in, because from the outside looking in, one would think that I was in a dream job, right? That, like, it was
Hmm.
the most amazing thing. And that wasn't my experience at all. And so it took me a lot of time to even accept for myself that I'm not thriving here, even though I had, these high expectations, and this is a job that many people would label as their dream job. It's not my dream for myself. And that took a lot of time, and it honestly a lot of courage, like, to stand in that truth for myself and to accept that I'm not happy here, and it's time for me to think about what comes next.
I'm just curious, was it like because there was an elongated period of time, or was there a moment or a couple of moments that helped you like think of that as that decision and to give you that courage? Was there something that occurred that led to that
Yeah.
awakening?
Yeah, I would say there were a few things over a short period of time. One of them was that the organization was going through a lot of transition, and I changed from one boss to another. And in that transition, I felt like my work and skill set wasn't valued in the same way.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I could kind of read the writings on the wall that because of all of the change that was happening around me, that the work that I was doing wasn't going to be prioritized in the same way. And it just really made me feel small. Like it made me lose like my professional confidence, because I just felt like I wasn't being utilized in the way that I knew I could be and wanted to be.
Hmm.
That's really powerful. If you start asking yourself, is it me more than once a week? That's not growth. That's probably workplace
Yeah.
trauma. And you deserve more than just surviving in a place that shrinks you, you know? And I find you so courageous for, there's a woman in our cohort that is leaving voluntarily so she could do the deep work. And I was like, you are a snapshot of bravery. You know, it took a clunk in my head, for me to be like, wait, let me see and pause and see if there's a new direction here that's more aligned with
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
passion and my purpose.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead,
The
Ivy.
the thing that I'm also thinking about is, what I and the caveat I will give is I'm not a medical professional, but what I understand about trauma is that trauma is something that like changes you. So even after experiencing those things, the idea that you can have the faith to say like, I know that I'll be good on the other side of this, like I can leave this role and like another good thing will come for me, or I can shift from this idea of like this scarcity mindset, or like I have to work every hour of the day to have like feel my worth or feel valued, or else insert whatever consequence that's probably irrational, or maybe there is some rationality to it, but to say that do the work to say like, okay, I know that I'm able to sort of rebuild and still have success in ways that I define for myself, is something that's like really powerful as well. And I think what I'm hearing us sort of talk about is like how you can unlock that for yourself to say, this is the opportunity, like this isn't something terrible that's happening to me, it's an opportunity to like unlock like a possibility of a
Yes.
future that can look exactly how I desire, and that is possible. Like I can have the future that is exactly how I desire.
Mhm.
That's so powerful. It's like, I don't call it like a failure, I call it redirection, you know? Um, and one of the reasons why for Malu, we have the first half of the workshops grounded in the past, actually, your past to your present, which is led by licensed therapists and psychologists. It's done on purpose. We talk about identity, we talk about trauma, we talk about grief, loss. It could be people around you, it could be your own person, like identity. And we do that on purpose because I don't think that in corporate America, we actually create the space to pause and reflect. And then as you move to the second part of the programming, which is focused on, it's coach led workshops
Mhm.
that focus on values and goal setting, right?
Mhm.
But my hypothesis is that your goal is going to be different if you do the internal work. Otherwise, the goal would just be the same of what you had
Exactly.
before you started the program.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
beautiful.
Yeah. I love that your program, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it is designed for women specifically,
Yes.
and it couples, like you were saying, both that like reflection and action from like a therapeutic and a coaching standpoint, which I think is unique in terms of that offering. I've not seen anywhere else before.
Yeah, maybe
Thank you
Melissa,
so
if
much.
we've talked a bit about road mapping and all of that, if you could walk us through sort of like the experience of the programming before we get into our do that or don't do that segment.
Sure, happy to. So the programming actually became a product based upon my own frustration. So when I started therapy, it was amazing. She is a life changing person. I am so honored that we have interest. Like she's on this path of healing for me. I've actually introduced like 5 people in my network to her. um, but she came from academia. So when it came to the hustle of being a partner at a management consultancy, it was hard for her to understand what that environment or lived experience was.
Mm.
And then I've had business coaches where I said, okay, the senior partner is marginalizing me, and my business coach would be like, oh, sorry, like this is beyond my scope. Do you have a therapist to talk to? And so I felt like I kept compartmentalizing my needs. They talk about not showing up as your whole self, or hiding, or covering part of your personality. And I felt like I was covering with my own holistic needs. And I questioned, why isn't there a place that combines both your past to your present, your present to your future? I'm Melissa whole
Mm-hmm.
every day. I'm not Melissa past to present, childhood trauma today, and then, goal setting with, a business coach tomorrow. Right. And so that was one of the things that was an impetus. Another one was I was part of the Chief Executive Network, which is a group of women that are supposed to help and support each other. And there was a community that spun out of it called Chiefs in Transition, which are women that are experiencing mostly layoffs, or they're contemplating a new change, maybe going to fractional or something like that, or are very unhappy in their current situation. And what I noticed when I got laid off, that the number in that group went from 200 to 500 within a couple of months, and most of the women being impacted in these most of the people being impacted by job loss were women and people of color. And so that's why I was like, you know what, like, and then I started talking to people that were throwing themselves back into the job market without actually doing the internal work. And so they're showing up to these interviews with anger, resentment, shame,
Sure.
and they weren't getting the next interview. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like more than ever, do we need, it's like an endemic in terms of people's fear of irrelevance. Like,
Yep.
what if we created a program that helped people understand? And this is not the soft stuff. This is actually strategically structuring and transforming and becoming. It's your journey to becoming.
Amazing. I'm grateful that you have created Malu. And, I think when we talk about like from ashes to beauty, I think that your journey is an example of taking, ashes and turning them into beauty that other people can benefit from. So thank you for that. We do want to move into our next segment, which we could talk to you all day, Melissa, but we know you have things to do and that don't include this podcast. So I'll move us into our next segment, which is called Do That or Don't Do That. So Ani and I will name some things, and you get to answer do that or don't do that, and tell us why you believe it should be a do that or don't do that. And we may chime in as well. So I will go first. My do that or don't do that is, should you give yourself permission to pivot?
Hell yes, do that. But do it smartly.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, when I say hell yeah, do that, I also want to say I recognize people's privileges. Not everybody can pivot, because some people maybe need their jobs to create food and have food for their children's plates. Okay. So I want to say that with, really understanding where you are, what support you have available, what financial income is coming in. But I would pivot. And if you don't have the financial income coming in, I would still pivot, but pilot and do it on the side. Make it a side hustle while you're doing, to reduce the risk.
Yeah.
I love that.
I love that too. And you talked earlier about like the strategy behind all of this. And I think even if your runway looks longer, it's possible to pivot as well. So if you're thinking like, oh, I need a different career choice, like maybe the runway for you is like, okay, I'm going to take supplemental courses while still working. I'm going to,
Yes.
whatever, pilot a side gig while still working. I think it's possible to do that.
Love it. So giving yourself permission to pivot is a do that.
It's a do that. Okay. So I will go with mine. Um, Policing language at work.
Ooh, okay. That is a good one. Okay. So, oh my goodness. Okay. So it's not as easy as do that or don't do that, because I think it depends.
Yeah.
Because when that occurs, like what I'm thinking about is, in my fractional role as the head of strategy and research for Cocoa, it used to be known as a DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging think tank research, and then advisory services added onto that. And so the way I would answer that question is, what is your intended outcome? So, for instance, a lot of organizations right now are pivoting. So they're getting rid of the D, diversity, or they're getting rid of the E, equity, right? It's all now head of inclusion, head of engagement, head of talent, right? If you need to change those words and police those language in order to continue to do the work, then so be it, right? It's about the outcome. But if you're changing the words, just for the sake of changing words with no action, then I think it's just superficial.
Yeah.
Yeah. We say that all the time. It depends.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Sometimes it's more
I'm not following the rules.
Yeah.
Okay, my next one is a do that or don't do that. Report negative work experience or traumatic experience to HR.
Oh, okay. So I would say don't do that unless, right? So don't, as a former head of HR for an IT and business consulting company, HR people, the myth is like they're for the people. No, they're actually there to protect the company. Okay. And so I made my own mistake when reporting sexual harassment one time and almost got lost a job because of retaliation. And so from my personal experience, don't do that, right? But if you have to, and if it's really impacting people in the workplace, this brings me back to a place where there was a managing director who was very toxic to our team. And so we leaned on the power of voice. And we all kind of created and understood and started documenting all of our experiences. And then we were inevitably able to remove that person from the situation. But if it was one person, me, or another person who were just saying those complaints, it was falling upon, no one was listening. So I would focus on the power of voice and be strategic about it. And I would also recommend, talk to an employment lawyer before you talk to HR.
Thank you. We appreciate that advice.
Yes.
Especially given your background.
Yes. I would say, though, as someone in HR, I would say do that, but the asterisk is similar. That one, I would definitely talk to an employment lawyer prior to. I would probably report anonymously before I reported with my name. I would sort of I think it's so context specific and depending on the organization
Right.
and the person that you are reporting, right? If we're calling a thing, I think it depends. I've seen some folks, if the right person reported and it was against the right person, you can see sort of swift action. And in other cases, it might not look like that. So
such great points. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is either way, you have to be strategic.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that concludes our do that and don't do that segment. Melissa, you survived. I hope it wasn't wasn't too painful.
No,
I
I
know
would
that
say
was surprising for you.
I thrive, not survive.
So, well, we really appreciate you joining us today. We can move into our wrap up and takeaways. So, Melissa, we'll let you have the first word. Any kind of key takeaways you would want folks to know before we end today's conversation?
I think if I were to summarize two key themes through the discussion today, one is your worth is not tied to your output. And then the second one would be don't confuse survival with resilience.
I love that. Love that. Thank you for that. Ani, anything you would add for your takeaways or final thoughts?
The thing I am leaving with today is around, healing requires both reflection and action, and thinking about, action can look like many different things. It can be a swift pivot. It can be a longer runway. It can be the action of just getting the help you need to sort of orient yourself towards what that change could look like in your life. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Thank you. I think mine is very similar to what both of you have lifted up. It is that wellness is non-negotiable, and there is no more positive impact that we can have than the ones that we have on ourselves. So it's important to center ourselves and center our wellness above it all. So Thank you, Melissa, for the work that you do with Malu and all of your other endeavors. Um, for folks that want to maybe connect with you, where can they find you?
You can add me on LinkedIn. You can reach me on malujourney.com. You could schedule time with my Zoom scheduler to actually meet one on one. I'm a human, I could be 3D too if you're local.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you spending time with us on Don't
Thank you
Do
for saying.
That.
Mhm.
We want to remind folks that if you enjoyed today's conversation, please leave us a review. It helps to boost our podcast engagement. We invite you to share the podcast with a peer or a colleague. And if you'd like to reach Ani and I directly, email us at the don't do that pod@gmail.com. And until next time, remember, don't do that.